What if the biggest mistake in the JonBenét's case investigation was about to be corrected? For years, the police had this sample in their hands, but never conducted the correct test. Now, with advancements in forensic technology, a forgotten DNA trace can finally reveal who was really at the crime scene that night. Are we closer to the truth than ever before? Or will this evidence be ignored once again? Nearly 3 decades have passed since the murder of JonBenét's Ramsey, and to this day, the case remains without definitive answers. The media has explored every detail, theorized about every suspect, and the public has split between believing in a conspiracy and a grotesque investigative failure. But what if I told you that a crucial piece of evidence was always there, untouched, waiting to be analyzed with the right technology? A small DNA trace was found at the crime scene, but at the time, forensic science wasn't advanced enough to interpret it correctly. Time passed, new techniques emerged, and old cases were solved with innovative genetic analyses. However, for some reason, this trace in the JonBenét's case never received the attention it deserved. The big question is, why? Did the police simply ignore this evidence? Or is there a bigger reason why this DNA was never properly tested? What could this sample reveal? If there's one thing we've learned in recent years, it's that science can turn the game around, even in the oldest investigations. And in the JonBenét's case, this could be the final piece to solve one of the most shocking crimes in modern history. But will we finally get answers? Or will this evidence be sidelined once more, keeping the mystery alive longer? Now, we need to go back to the beginning to understand how this mistake happened and why it might be the key to everything. When it comes to unsolved murders, many imagine that there's a lack of evidence or that the suspects simply escaped without leaving traces. But what if the problem is exactly the opposite? What if the police always had the DNA of the culprit on hand and simply didn't know what to do with it? That's exactly what happened in the JonBenét's Ramsey case. During the investigation, a genetic trace was found on her clothing, and at the time, the available DNA tests weren't precise enough to identify the owner of that sample. The case went cold, suspects were interrogated and dismissed, and the evidence ended up being set aside. The most shocking part? This wasn't an isolated mistake. The same type of failure has occurred in other crimes, such as the Golden State Killer case, who remained at large for decades until a simple DNA analysis revealed his identity. In other words, the technology to solve the JonBenét's case has existed for years, but for some reason, it was never used. This leads us to an even more concerning question. Do they not want to solve this crime? Are there hidden interests, powerful people, or even such severe flaws in the original investigation that it would simply be better to leave this case unsolved? If the genetic analysis were done correctly, the results could expose much more than just the culprit. They could dismantle the entire narrative built by the police, the media, and perhaps even the Ramsey family themselves. And that's exactly why we need to understand what this sample can reveal and who might be afraid of this revelation. What makes this case so frustrating is not just the fact that it remains unsolved, but that the path to the truth was always there, neglected or deliberately ignored. The police made mistakes from the very beginning. By allowing the crime scene to be contaminated, they compromised crucial evidence. By focusing on specific theories, they ignored obvious possibilities. And perhaps most seriously, by not using the most advanced forensic technology available today, they missed a unique opportunity to solve the case. But why hasn't this DNA been analyzed correctly until now? The answer may lie in the Boulder Police Department's resistance to admit they failed. If this new analysis reveals that the true culprit was always within reach, it would mean exposing decades of incompetence. Another factor is the influence of the Ramsey family. From the start, John Ramsey insisted that his family was innocent, and when a previous DNA test showed that the unknown sample didn't belong to any household member, it helped to dismiss the suspicions. But modern genetic genealogy could go further and finally point to a real name. And here arises the dilemma. If this evidence is finally tested and leads to an unexpected suspect, what would the consequences be? Cases like this show that often the truth isn't revealed due to a lack of technology, but rather a lack of interest. Well, this time, with public pressure and advances in forensic science, we finally see this analysis buried along with all the answers that could change the course of the investigation. If this sample is tested correctly, there's no way to predict the impact it will have. But one thing is certain, the truth is closer than ever. It just remains to be seen if someone will have the courage to expose it. Imagine a crime so brutal that, even after nearly 3 decades, it still causes outrage. Now think of a crucial clue that was right in the police's eyes all along, but was ignored. It sounds absurd, but that's exactly what happened in the JonBenét's Ramsey case. That night in 1996, investigators arrived at the family mansion and found a scene that seemed straight out of a movie. A ransom note that was too long, handwritten, demanding a curious ransom amount, practically identical to the girl's father's Christmas bonus. A crime planned down to the smallest detail, or something improvised? The police, amidst the chaos, contaminated the scene. They allowed people to enter and leave the house, touched objects without gloves, lost any chance to preserve evidence correctly. But the biggest mistake, the one that may have cost the case resolution, was in a small fragment of DNA found on the victim's clothing. This genetic trace didn't match anyone in the household. This was enough to dismiss suspicions of the Ramseys, but at the time the available tests were rudimentary. Forensic technology wasn't capable of accurately distinguishing whether that DNA was transferred through casual contact or belonged to the true murderer. And this is where things get even more disturbing. While other cases over the years were solved with cutting-edge technology, JonBenét's sample remained forgotten. The question that won't go away: if this trace were analyzed correctly today, would we finally know who was there that night? But before reaching that answer, we need to understand why this evidence was never taken seriously. If this DNA can point to the murderer, why was it never the focus of the investigation? The answer might be more frightening than we imagine. The Ramsey family always had powerful connections. From the start, John Ramsey hired renowned lawyers and media specialists to control the narrative. The press, which should have pressured for answers, quickly split between attacking and defending JonBenét's parents, diverting focus from what really mattered: the evidence. The bolder police, in turn, seemed reluctant to correct their own mistakes. Admitting they had neglected a fundamental clue would mean exposing years of incompetence. Worse still, it could mean that a dangerous murderer had been at large all this time. Another intriguing point is that cases like the Golden State Killer were solved with forensic genealogy, a technique that can identify close relatives of a suspect from a genetic sample. If JonBenét's DNA were analyzed using this method, it could point to a real name, someone who was there at the crime scene. But what if that name is someone unexpected? Someone who could completely change the narrative that has been maintained for all these years? The silence about this evidence raises one last question. Is someone, somewhere, afraid of what this analysis might reveal? Because if this DNA is finally tested correctly, perhaps the story we know about JonBenét's Ramsey is about to change forever. The room where the evidence from the JonBenét's case is archived is cold and silent. Hundreds of folders, sealed boxes, documents aged by time. Amidst this, a small sealed envelope contains something that could change everything: a DNA trace that was forgotten for years. Now, with advancements in forensic technology, it can be tested in a way never done before. But will that happen? Or does someone still prefer that this evidence remains where it is, untouched? Advances in science in recent years have allowed old cases to be solved with unprecedented precision. The Golden State Killer, for example, went decades without being identified until a DNA analysis directly linked. Technology hasn't been used yet. The question that remains is, why? The reactions of those involved in the case show the weight of this possibility. For the Ramsey family, this could be the last chance to clear their names and finally find justice. But what about the authorities? Testing this sample could mean that serious mistakes were made in the past, that clues were ignored, and that the investigation was conducted poorly from the start. Within the police, there is a mix of interest and resistance. Some investigators believe that testing this DNA could close the case once and for all. Others fear what might be discovered. If the DNA points to someone already known in the investigation, what does that mean for the police's credibility? Now imagine the impact of this revelation. If this sample is finally analyzed and reveals a name, the truth could come to light in an uncontrollable way. But at the same time, the mere fact that this evidence is being mentioned again could awaken forces that don't want it to happen. The question remains, are we facing the moment that can actually solve the case, or will this clue be buried once more? The decision to test the DNA sample is finally announced. For some, it represents the last hope for justice for JonBenét's. For others, it's a dangerous threat that could expose decades-old mistakes and secrets. The laboratory responsible for the examination confirms that the analysis will be done using the most advanced available techniques, those that have already identified criminals years after their crimes. But as the news spreads, unexpected reactions begin to emerge. Within the police, there is evident discomfort. Some investigators who worked on the case from the beginning feel that their mistakes might be revealed to the world. Old documents are re-examined, and what once seemed like a simple protocol failure begins to take on darker contours. Why did this sample remain unanalyzed for so long? Who made that decision? The Ramsey family, who have been asking for this test for years, now find themselves in a delicate position. If the DNA confirms the presence of a stranger at the crime scene, they can finally rid themselves of the suspicions that have always haunted them. But what if the results point to something unexpected? How would that change the narrative of the case? When the laboratory finally releases the preliminary report, the tension is unbearable. The sample contains genetic material that doesn't belong to anyone in the family. This should be a significant breakthrough, but instead it raises more questions than answers. Who is this person? Why was this DNA there? And more importantly, why did the police never cross-reference this information with forensic databases before? The public, who has been following the case for years, reacts with outrage. How did such important evidence remain forgotten for so long? On television programs and social media, experts discuss the impact of this discovery. Some believe that the true culprit can finally be found. Others question whether, even with this new information, the police are truly interested in solving the case. Amidst this chaos, an even more intriguing detail emerges. The genetic profile found has similarities with existing records, but the person's identity has not yet been confirmed. This means that someone, somewhere, could be directly linked to the crime and might not even know they are about to be discovered. But there's a problem. For this connection to be made, the police need access to a specific database, which requires approval from higher authorities. And here comes a new obstacle. For some reason, this permission is not granted immediately. The JonBenét's case, which seemed to finally have a chance to be resolved, once again faces barriers that don't make sense at first glance. Now, the question lingering in the air is, who is afraid of what this DNA might reveal? If the truth is within reach, why is there still resistance to pursuing it to the end? If there's one thing this case teaches us, it's that the truth can be right in front of us all the time, but that doesn't mean it will be accepted or revealed. Now we know there is DNA that can change everything. It's not theory, it's not speculation, it's a fact. But if the solution seems so obvious, why hasn't it happened yet? The JonBenét's case has always been surrounded by doubts, contradictions, and above all, resistance. From the very beginning, there were glaring failures that compromised the investigation. The crime scene was contaminated, suspects were dismissed without a convincing explanation, and most unbelievably, a genetic piece of evidence remained untouched for decades. Now, when the necessary technology to cross-reference this DNA with forensic databases and perhaps find a match finally exists, new obstacles arise. And this is where the big question comes in. Or is there something or someone that needs to be protected? The truth about JonBenét's may be closer than ever, but there are forces that seem interested in keeping this mystery intact. And when a case remains unsolved for so long, it's not just a matter of lack of evidence. Sometimes it's because the answers aren't convenient for those who should reveal them. If this DNA is finally tested and points to someone, what will happen? Would it be a name already known from the investigation? Someone who was ignored at the time? Or worse, could it confirm suspicions that many have always had, but no one dares to say out loud? This leads us to an even more uncomfortable question. How many other cases are in the same situation? How many times have essential pieces of evidence been forgotten simply because exposing the truth could cause an impact that someone wasn't willing to face? And that's exactly why talking about this case matters. It's not just about JonBenét's. It's about how a system can fail, and in some cases, perhaps wasn't even failing, but making a deliberate choice. What do you think? Will this evidence finally have the destiny it should, or will it just be another clue that disappears among so many others? Comment here with your opinion. I want to know what you think. And if this case has already shocked you, wait until you learn about another mystery that may have been manipulated in an even more absurd way. Click on the next video and discover another crime that seemed impossible to solve, until a neglected detail changed everything. If you stayed with me until here, comment, I am in favor of the truth. This way, I'll know that you really care about this story and want to see justice happen. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because here we don't leave questions unanswered, and we even bring you details that no one wants you to know. See you in the next video.